Bienvenue. Welcome once again to another Property Matters, the show where we discuss things that affect people who are buying properties, who are selling properties, and everything in between. And as per usual, we are joined by Hamish McClare of Search Convey, our Lord and Master, who helped set this thing up in the first place. And one of the best friends of the show is Wendy Gibson of the First Time Buyers Club, a lady who has bought and sold and worked with a number of different projects, but also is dedicated, at least this part of her life, to helping people getting on the ladder and understanding what those trials and tribulations are and whether or not there's a way of ameliorating them. So, without further ado, let me introduce today's topic. It's the 4-week fix. Can home buying get any quicker? Well, Hamish, will you start us off, please?
Well, it's not the government that is suggesting home buyers get it quicker. We go through these phases, don't we? What's quite interesting, I think we have several people. What happened, there were elements of confusion last year and the year before last, because all of a sudden we had this, what we call material information. I think material information is a good description for early information, but unfortunately the meaning doesn't come across. Material information is the information that is relative to the property which you are going to be buying, or if somebody happens to be selling the property. The information is material information. It's actually using material as an adjective as opposed to a noun. So it is important information as much as it is material information. Now, it's not the first time this, as I said, we had the confusion because the Law Society decided that they would take on board something evolved by the national standards, and they brought in something which was a little bit sort of outlandish, to say the least, mainly because they hadn't spoken to enough solicitors about the whole thing. So all of a sudden they come out and say, right, this is what you've got to do, estate agents, you're going to have to do this, and if you're going to have to do this, also the solicitor's going to have to put up with it. And there was a big outcry, so they decided everybody changed their mind. Oh, another U-turn. Well, there's a surprise. And then 20 years ago, there was a Labour government, believe it or not. And a Labour government decided it would be a good idea that we would help the home buyers and the home sellers, probably saving another 4 weeks as well. In fact, it did quite a good job in part where they had home information packs. But then we had the next government came in, threw them out again. So we've got all of this sort of going on, but because we've come up with now the Law Society's come up with what they think is an excellent sort of way of informing people of what the information is about. The government's coming out with it, various environmental reports coming. Everybody's trying to fix this and fix it and fix it and fix it. But they seem to forget that no one size fits all. And as Wendy can actually sort of explain, because she's helping people, and do bear in mind, many of you who are actually sort of looking in at the moment, it is not necessarily the first-time buyers that need the sort of help that Wendy can give, because people are spending longer now living in their properties. And in fact, with what they have to go through, and if they happen to be selling a property and moving to another one, a lot of them are very hesitant about doing it. So there's so much change going on. Something like Wendy keeps in touch with all these changes and as they're happening. And she knows a lot more of what goes on in the background. I just handle simple aspects of the whole process, whereas Wendy has to look at it, the whole picture from start to finish, because she wants to get those people moved.
Wendy, welcome back to the show. As I said off air, it sounds like a bumper sticker, doesn't it? The 4-week fix, home buyers get it quicker. But the truth of the matter is, every time a government comes, even going back to that Labour government all those many years ago, I don't think we have Labour. We have sort of Labour Mark II. It's not really proper Labour, is it? But anyway, when it was closer to what I'd recognise as a Labour government, and they came out, it's just like ping pong. Labour government brings something that reduces it. Conservative government wipes that away because they neg everything that the Labour government does, and we're back to square one. Are we ever going to be able to find a way of reducing the amount of time it takes?
I certainly hope so. And I think, there are loads of people out there who are trying their best to try and find a solution to this. If nothing else, it's quite clear that the home buying industry is absolutely rife for disruption. And it's only a case of time until somebody finds a way to do so, whether it is through digital means, whether it is through blockchain technology, who knows? But when I bought my first home, it only took me 3 months. And nowadays, the average is 5. And you'd think with all this modern technology that it should be so much quicker. Yeah, 5.
That's the best. That's pretty much over nearly half the year.
It is nearly half the year. And when volumes go up, it takes even longer because obviously things slow down when you've got more cases in your pipeline. There's various reasons for this. There's not one specific issue that's caused this problem. A lot of it is down to the fact that a lot of information has actually gone missing from title deeds over the years. There could be missing landlords, for example. The time it takes to actually get some of the mandatory information that's required from the conveyancers need to actually get through the conveyancing process. That is it. My biggest, I think a lot of management companies, for example, with leasehold flats, there doesn't seem to be any recourse back to them if they take forever to actually get back with management packs, for example. But then again, regulation has added extra checks and balances the conveyancers have to do. Mortgage lenders have also added extra checks and balances the conveyancers have to do. So the system is slowly, it feels a bit like the donkey who's just about to have his back broken by an extra bit of straw added to it.
And it sounds like then somebody puts a small house on the back of that said donkey and it collapses on a muddled heap. Hamish,
Indeed.
Would it be fair to say that if you get and this is a shameless plug for IPSA, if you get your search from an organization such as yours, which is focused on the right people to get the right information because they are based on their own locality, that reduces the amount of time it takes to get the right search. And as using my previous example, if I can do, of John Lewis, you get back the information you need rather than everything that there is out there. That will reduce the time it takes.
Well, we look at it from two sides. I mean, you're absolutely right in that it is the best way to get the information. Somebody who knows the locality, knows how the land charges offices work there, knows how the council offices sort of work there, and actually knows the whole place geographically. They're bound to have the better stab. It's not even a stab. They can actually sort of collect the information. They probably know 75% of it already. Many people who've been, particularly if they've been working in the area for some good time.
But I know that IPSA members tend to produce almost surgically prepared data so that it makes it, I would have thought, I'm going back to Wendy for this, if you get data that has been absolutely prepped, does that not make the conveyancer's life not just easier, but swifter?
It totally does, because it's down to reliance of information and how reliable that information is. So Hamish was talking earlier about the material information that requirement that came in, which required estate agents to actually provide upfront information when listing properties. What we've been finding is a lot of that is untrustworthy information. There's that might be changing with the new act coming in to do with digital information and the move away from material information being held under trading standards towards this digital act. So that may go some way to help. But that's the key thing. It's the reliability of the information. How much can you trust the information that's being provided to be the truth and all the truth, rather than just errors, misinformation, or, as we see still nowadays, in many property listings, when it says leasehold and you then delve into the listing to try and find more information about the leasehold, and it just says, ask the agent.
How frustrating. Hamish, it would seem to me that this talk of digitization, I mean, there's been stabs at this thus far. And yet I fully know, having spoken to you on a number of occasions, and other members of IPSA, past and present, that a lot of the digitized data is only a part of the story.
Well, very, very much so. Very, very much so. But it's also how that information is collated. What we do have is that basic information, which originally was the responsibility just of the council. It is coming in from several different directions now. Some organisations, particularly corporates, they will store a lot of the information, and one never knows quite when it's going to be updated. But that information is stored, so they will collect information from there, plus bits of new information. They will collect other information from Land Registry, put it all together. Sad to say, and this puts more work upon the solicitor, as Wendy was just indicating there. A lot of this information is superfluous to the particular aspect of the property they're looking at.
Quite.
And the challenge is, it's like anything. Very rarely do we pick up a book and say, wow, that chapter 10 was fantastic. We read a book because it's the whole of the book, it's the whole of the content, but we have to read it from start to finish. Otherwise, it's incomplete. And it's much the sort of same. The conveyancer or solicitor has to actually look through all of that information. And of course, the more information there is, the longer it takes to look at it. But if it's refined before somebody gets to the information, it cuts down that reading, because what a conveyancer is doing, what a solicitor is doing, is working out the risk. Now, of course, a property lawyer knows much more about the sort of risk side of things than would just a conveyancer. It's not to say that conveyancers aren't able to do it, but what it is, from the normal sort of perspective, somebody's actually trained in law, because there are bigger demands now coming of the person that's acting as the conveyancer for more and more aspects. And of course, that broader training, but being trained sort of in law, gives the opportunity to, the solicitor to actually sort of bring out their knowledge. Whereas unfortunately, because of the way in which it's tried to be processed, it's high volumes again. Wendy was indicating this. It doesn't just happen when times are busy. It's calmed down a bit. Yet still, some people are taking 2 to 3 weeks longer to get the same information back. When in fact, it won't be the same information. It's information which is unrefined. It's because it just piles up. And because somebody receives the information, has got to convert it into a search and then get that search sent off. But they received one 4 or 5 weeks ago, which comes before the one which came yesterday. The fact that the information came back yesterday from the one that they requested yesterday,
right,
doesn't mean they can send it back. It goes to the bottom of the pile.
No, of course.
Whereas,
you end up with your big stack there, and with people waiting weeks and weeks, if not months and months, for this.
It tends not to be the months, but you're quite right. It can be weeks and weeks. And the 4 weeks saved can actually be a combined thing of just between searches and the right person handling the information. Never mind anything else that the government want to introduce.
Wendy, what worries me a little bit is I don't think there is a want for us to move into generation rent, but because of the high price of these of first-time buyers, there's a first-time buyer. What we're looking north of 300,000 for something sensible, and then on top of that, the amount of time, energy, effort, and extra money that needs to be spent just to get over the line, it even though it's still onerous to be renting places, I can understand why people want to slip in that direction. How do we get out this conundrum?
the younger generations don't actually feel as tied to owning their own home like older generations did. The whole ethos of your home is your castle is starting to fall away by the wayside a bit. Partly, I think, because people are just giving up. They're realizing that it's almost impossible for them to ever get on the property ladder, so they don't even bother to try. But they also enjoy the flexibilities and the lack of responsibility that comes with being a renter rather than a homeowner. But just going back to your point regarding where times can be saved, the biggest issue that first-time buyers have is that they've never been through the process before. So they are starting from a position of knowledge zero. They haven't got any past experience. And if they're lucky, they might know somebody who bought, or their parents bought a home years ago, but the process has changed so much since then. So their parents can only give them some tiny little snapshot, in using Hamish's analogy, one chapter of an entire book of experience in home buying, for example. And the reason why there's such a lot of data that's required to be collected about everything is because of the way the law is set up, where the buyer of the property is actually responsible for, and their advisors, their solicitors being one of them, the buyer is responsible for actually doing all the discovery around the condition of the property, the title of the property, what the terms and conditions that they are actually buying into. Now, I don't think that's bad, because it then means that the information that they are getting is for their purposes that they can then make informed decisions on. If there's a reliance on the seller actually providing this information, it does beg the question how many porcupines are going to be included in that information, or how much material stuff is going to be accidentally omitted.
Well, that's the bit that actually worries me more. It's actually less about the stuff that's said and more about the stuff that's unsaid.
I completely agree with you. And this is where it's important that we can actually rely, the trustworthiness of that information is so important. And so I don't disagree with the government about wanting to reduce the time it takes to actually buy a home by pushing for the information to be provided by the seller versus the buyer actually doing the collecting of the information themselves. But it really comes down to how trustworthy that information is going to be. Because if it's, we see it time and time again, you go into a home and you think, oh, this looks really lovely because it's been freshly decorated. What you don't realize is it's been freshly decorated because there's been a leak, and they've ended up painting over the stain, so you can't actually see the evidence of where the leak was. That's just a typical example. Whereas in this analogy, you want the home, well, as it stands at the moment, you want the home without any information, so that the buyer themselves is the one who collates all the information about the home, does their inspections, does their investigations, their solicitors does all the search relating to title deed, terms and conditions, service charges, ground rents, all of those sorts of things that might be attached to the property, so that the buyer can then make the most they can make a decision based on the most trustworthy information possible. So absolutely, there are ways that this process can be sped up. I understand that the government wanting to put the onus on providing that information on the seller rather than the buyer means that fewer properties should then fall through. The sales should then fall through, only to have to then start the process again with the new buyer doing new discoveries and new investigations. But fundamentally, more than anything else, that information needs to be relied upon.
Rubbish in, rubbish out. Hamish, would you care to take us home?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's very, very interesting the way Wendy explained that. I mean, I can put that into perspective, because the type of work that Search and Convey do, and also the members of IPSA or IPSA, the Association of Independent Personal Search Agents, is the fact that we used to go back, take the step back, let's go back those 20 years. prior to home information packs, we would go into a local council and we would actually look at the council's registers. We would carry out a search of those registers, and therefore we could actually, if you like, we stood or fell by that information we put down. Absolutely sort of great. Did we mind driving? Well, no, it was just sort of part of one, just arranged to actually do it, because realistically we were getting paid for the work that we were doing. Now we scroll forward 10, 15 years, 20 years, and what we've got is a whole different sort of ball game now. First of all, in very, very rarely would we need to go into the council to actually see the records now. Now, sometimes we can actually go in and we can view the records, and that is great. All too often, we are told these are what the records are.
Huh.
Now, where's your trust? Where's your faith? Because we now know that particular person working in the land charges offices for the council, where the information is normally sort of gathered through, they have less experience working in that area than many of those people who carry out the personal searches have. They could be at one end of the county because the councils are getting bigger and bigger because they're reducing the size of them.
Yeah.
So that particular person working in Aylesbury doesn't know how they actually sort of carry out the work in High Wycombe, for example. They don't know High Wycombe because they live in Aylesbury.
Right.
Where we're not any longer able to sort of turn around ourselves and say, oh, I trust that. Because we haven't seen the information that we can actually refine. And of course, it's much the same sort of thing goes on. The council also send information to the land registry. Have they sent all of the information? Have they sent the information accurately? Well, we don't know. We only get what land registry have been told, or how they have interpreted it, I should say. So it's reliability. It's back to that trust aspect again. There are ways we are cutting down, and I think people who are using the appropriate providers of the data, they are the ones that are gaining. They're the ones that are saving the time. They're the ones that are 4 weeks ahead already anyway.
Right.
And until people can actually start doing that, there's nothing on the table at the moment that the government can do to take 4 weeks out of the majority of cases.
Wow. All right. So we've got a couple of things we're going to leave you with. One is the most obvious, which is, like all financial transactions, there has to be a base level of trust in it for it to be a properly agreed transaction. And it's perhaps becoming harder to trust some of the data, because no longer can you drive into the place and actually see it with your own bleeming eyes. Secondly, not all the data has been made available online or through data. So there's still an element of foraging, which is why the IPSA members are so blooming useful, because they are, no offense, Hamish, they're like tenacious beasts, and they keep ravaging until they find what they need to find. That's what makes them so good. They're less corporate, who do just enough to get the job done. They'll keep going until they're down to patient zero and they found the source and it's correct. But even so, they're not always trusting the data. And then on top of that, we are in a position where it's harder and harder to tell what's under. Shameless plug, if you want to check in on Fridays and see Cladding Matters, you'll hear talk about when you take the cladding off, finding out what's really underneath. And you don't exactly know what's been happening. Have they papered over the cracks? Have they painted over the stains? You don't necessarily know. So this is the situation we find ourselves in. And can what the government's doing or proposing to do, putting the onus on the seller to provide the information? I mean, that logically, Wendy, I think you probably agree this is potentially a good move, but is it putting a sticking plaster on a gaping wound? I don't know. Only time will tell. Thank you so much, Hamish, for having set this up and, of course, working with me on this. And Wendy Gibson, friend of the show, First Time Buyers Club. If you want to find out information on how to put yourself in the best possible position, if you're a first-time buyer or even if you're a returning buyer, but the system having changed so radically, just don't know which end is which, please, I recommend going to the firsttimebuyersclub.uk and arrange a chat with Wendy. She'll set you straight or do her very best to. We've received a comment from Zara, friend of the show. Every chain will have a third-party management company involved with a big exclamation mark at the end. It's probably everybody should take note of that one. Thank you, Zara. And to all of you watching, thank you very much for sticking with us. We are trying to bring you the things that are going to affect the way in which you take on property. And it may not always be plain sailing. We won't necessarily tell you how to do it, but we'll certainly point you in a direction where you should look and use that critical thinking to try and find out the best way forward. Until next week, please keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars, look after their mental health, and question where the data comes from. Follow the data. Until next week, bye-bye.